Lawrence Kurliger, he's an engineer specializing in the ocean floor. He works with the investigative team of Al Abu Yar. Says the zone seen as the most likely site of the debris, deepest point about 2,800 feet is all, in its shallowest, and its deepest part at around 15,000 feet at its deepest point. And he said water salinity and temperature can affect the distance of the beacon signal also, that it can travel. Now, however much salt in the water, they're telling us, is how far the beacon can broadcast for. So if it's really salty water, it only goes a shorter way. And temperature, water temperature, can also affect the beacon signal. Now, isn't there some way you could put a beacon on that solidly that would not be removed in any circumstance and could broadcast clearly for more than 3 months? Why not? If it's going to save lives, thousands of lives down the road, and repeat accidents of the same kind. That was Air France's deadliest plane crash, by the way, and the world's worst commercial air accident since 2001. I'm referring, of course, to the one I mentioned at the top of the show, the American Airlines Flight 587, the Airbus Industries A300, that crashed into Bell Harbor at New York City residential area shortly after takeoff from JFK Airport. That was in November in 2001. And in 2004, October 26th, they stated the cause of the crash was overuse of the rudder to counter wake turbulence. Wind shear, if you'll remember, was the cause of that one. Highly unlikely. Full of people going home to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. And if you'll recall, at that time of year, it was November, I can recall now, in 2001, it was still, people were very spooked about aircraft falling out of the sky or crashing into buildings. Very, 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 very jittery, skittish. And, of course, they sacrificed this Santo Domingo flight. 260 passengers perish. And they say the cause was wind shear. Spaceman back with more in a moment on AM 640 and a view from space.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640. Extreme radio for extreme times. This is a view from space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
We got to call space. This is a view from space on AM 640. How'd you like to email me? You can. Simply, you got a comment. You have some information. You can write to space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. CC writes, and he gets it pretty close. He gets it very close. Circumstances, he writes, seems to point to an act of corporate warfare. And I'll get into that in just a moment, which is the reason I wanted to share this email from CC with you before I begin that. He says, considering that the Mulroney-Schreiber scandal had and still is got a lot to do with an Airbus contract scandal, and considering that there must be certain other aircraft corporations that would rather sell their planes to the markets in question, perhaps this is one sick way of trying to sway a major prospective aircraft purchase decision. He's close. The timing is just a bit more than synchronicity. He also has one of their last paragraph here at the bottom where he explains where the plane was most likely struck by an electromagnet pulse weapon, which fried the plane's circuits and most likely destroyed their radio communications along with their control circuits. And that part I buy, and he's very close on the corporate warfare, but it's not about selling aircraft. No, it's about who's on that aircraft. Because as soon as an aircraft goes down, the first thing I do is I grab a hold of the passenger list. And the passenger list on Air France Flight 447 is astounding. Absolutely astounding. Have you heard about anybody that was on that aircraft except for this gentleman? Because I broadcast from Canada. Guelph is the name of the town that he was from, and it's not too far from where I'm broadcasting right at this moment now. My local audience will have probably heard of the Coca-Cola executive that was on that flight, but that would be the only person that anyone really knew was aboard. But there were some very, very, very high-placed people aboard that aircraft. I just want to cover some more breaking news here that broke this morning at 8 o'clock with yet another cover-up attempt made by the Air France people and the French government. The agency investigating the crash, which is Alain Bouillard, says Air France had not replaced instruments that measure airspeed on the aircraft, which the manufacturer had recommended. Agency head Paul-Louis Arcelanian says some problems had been detected with the instruments on the Airbus 330, that model that disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean on May 31st, the backward 13. Arcelanian says Airbus has recommended that airlines replace the instruments on the A330. The head of the crash investigation says Air France had not changed the instruments known as pitot tubes on the plane that crashed. He said he warned against jumping to conclusions, but he says planes can be flown safely now with damaged systems. An Air France memo on Friday said it was replacing pitot tubes on all medium and long-haul Airbus jets. Now, that, I believe, is going to be the instruments that measure airspeed. I believe that's the choice of Alain Bouillard. That's what he's going to decide. That it was the instruments that measure the airspeed on the aircraft, which froze because of the water coming up, sucked up by the immense storm, which was not on the radar. I saw the picture of that time frame in that area on that Sunday night, and there were no huge thunderstorms in the area. Yes, there was rain. Yes, there were small pockets of dots of red, but only about, like I said earlier, 2 or 3. The rest were small green and splattered. Not a great massive front. So here's what they're going to want you to believe what happened aboard Flight 447. This will end up being the official story. First, the autopilot disengaged. Now, that will corroborate with what Alain Bouillard said, that the autopilot was not flying the plane. And then an alarm would warn passengers that all hell was breaking loose on that doomed aircraft. Shortly after 11 o'clock, Sunday Brazil time, and the Airbus 330 flies through terrific black clouds, packing updraft winds of 100 miles an hour. This is the story that they're probably going to tell you. This will be the official story, I believe. All planes, even military ones, are at risk when buffeted by winds of such ferocity, they'll say. And Flight 447 was no exception. Within a span of 14 minutes, its electrical systems and cabin pressure would fail. The plane would break apart, begin its dive into death into the Atlantic Ocean with all 228 people aboard screaming. Investigators are going to have to rely on last messages transmitted by this aircraft, and a chronology of those messages